Welcome back to cinnamon rolls. Yesterday we made our dough and we let it rise overnight, which is letting it ferment. Yesterday we talked about that there are 8 steps to making cinnamon rolls. There's actually 10 steps, but some recipes, for instance, when you make your pizza dough, are going to be less than 8 steps. It all depends on how intense the cinnamon or how intense the yeast bread recipe is. So to review those steps, yesterday step 1 is measuring your ingredients, your mise en place, and we did that. Step 2 is mixing your dough and kneading it, and we did that. And step 3 is letting the dough ferment. And here's our fermented dough. As you see, it has gotten much larger. It is filling the bowl. It's very nice. And if you see, this is nice and soft still because we put oil in that bowl. And there are no dry edges on the dough. All right? So today we're moving forward to step 4. And step 4 is the anger management step of yeast bread. And that is punching down the dough. And it is doing exactly what it says. It's making a fist and punching down the dough. So you take your fist and you just start punching the dough. And if you have a lot of anger and frustration in your life, you can get both going if you need to. But again, I don't, so I'm not going to do that. So you get, the purpose of this is to get all of that extra air out of the dough. So we've punched down the dough, and it has some oil on it, which is perfectly fine. I'm going to take this out, okay, and kind of get it into a ball. And at this point, if we try to roll out the dough, we are going to have a lot of frustration in our life. And I'm going to demonstrate what happens if you try to roll the dough out right now. When this dough was rising, the gluten was developing and it gets all worked up, okay? It has to calm down before you roll out the dough. So if I try to start rolling out this dough, it's going to shrink back. I roll it out and it just comes back. So if I let it sit here for about 5 minutes, when I go to roll out the dough, it will cooperate with me. So we're going to give this about 5 minutes to rest and then we'll be back. Okay, I've been rolling out the dough. It rested and it only took a minute to roll it out. I'm just finishing up getting my size. We are supposed to roll this to a 13 by 9. I'm sorry, no, not a 13 by 9. I believe it's 15 by 20 rectangle. Okay. Now, getting it pretty close to that size is important so that the dough is even inside the cinnamon roll. So this is 15 by 9, and these are laminated so they can be washed, and we can lay this right on the dough and see how close we are. And it needs to be just a little bit longer. So I'm just going to use the rolling pin. And I'm going to true up my corners so they're closer to a rectangle rather than being quite so round. Let's see if I got the length. Okay, so we have our 15 by 9 rectangle. Now, our next step, in talking about the steps of yeast breads, once we've punched down our dough, the next step is to portion the dough. If we were making loaves of bread, or dinner rolls, but traditionally loaves of bread, you would have this big batch of dough, and it usually makes 2 loaves if you're making it at home. So you would portion that dough, which means you would cut the dough in half, so you'd have 2 blobs of dough. All right, and then what you would do is you would make each of those blobs into a nice round ball. Then you would shape each of those into your dinner loaf. And that's where this recipe is different because we're not making a loaf of bread, we're making cinnamon rolls. So after we punch down the dough, we roll it out, all right, and this is just another version of something to do with bread. Now we're going to put butter and sugar and cinnamon in here. So we need to make like a no painting zone. So I'm going to just put a little line across here. On this little ledge here, I don't want to put any butter, sugar, or cinnamon. It's just a guide. I'm not cutting all the way through, I'm just making a little line because then it's very, very hard to seal the dough shut. So I've melted the butter. Here's a half cup of butter, and this gets messy. It's okay. This gets poured onto the dough. And then I'm going to use a pastry brush and paint the dough with the butter. Again, I'm staying out of the no paint zone. And all of this butter gets spread all over the dough. This is not a low-calorie recipe by any stretch of the imagination, but boy, does it taste good. So, you know, if you have a cinnamon roll, you can just go out and run a couple miles, you know, to make it all equal out. All right. And it's okay to just put some of the extra dough on the, or extra butter on the table. This is very, very heavy. Okay. Now, we take our sugar cinnamon mixture. Now I've already mixed this. The easiest way that I find to do this is to put your sugar, which is 1.5 cups, and 3 tablespoons of cinnamon in a Ziploc bag, and just kind of, you know, move it around so that it all gets mixed. And then you pour that into the center here. And again, I'm going to spread it. And again, I've washed my hands. And there's a clump of sugar, so I'm just going to get that out. There's another one. Oh, that one broke. All right, and I'm going to spread it everywhere except the no paint zone. You want to go all the way to the edges, because if somebody gets that cinnamon roll from the edge, you want them to get some sugar and cinnamon in theirs as well. Okay, so if you find little lumps, you can just break them up. Sometimes when sugar changes temperature, it gets warm and then it gets cold. You get some condensation in the sugar, and it causes those little clumps of sugar. You just spread this all around. Okay, now I'm going to go wash my hands real quick just because they're covered with sugar and cinnamon, and I will be okay. I'm back. We are now going to roll the dough. You want to start at this end. The no paint zone is the very last piece to go over. So you just start folding up this edge, and again, my hands are going to get dirty again. Making yeast bread is a very much a hands-on job. Now in the big companies, they have machines that do all this. But again, they don't taste near as good as dough that's been done traditionally. Okay, now when we get to this no paint zone, we're going to bring that over and pinch. Okay? But if it's covered with sugar and cinnamon and butter, it won't pinch. All right, because you've got sugar and cinnamon in there. It's like sand. Okay. Just pinch, pinch, pinch. All right, and I'm going to kind of clean up the ends here. So we have a nice, I'm going to finish rolling that over. Even it out. I'm actually going to pick it up and bring it closer to me so I don't have to lean so far. Okay, so there's our rolled up cinnamon rolls. Okay, now, again, in the steps of yeast bread, after we knead, then it ferments, then we punch down the dough. We've done that. Then it's portion and round the dough, which we're not making loaves of bread, so that doesn't really happen here. But the next step is shaping the portions, or making the portions exactly like you want them. And so that's what we're going to do here. Now, if I took a knife and tried to cut this, all I would do would be to smash this bread. So this is, whoever came up with this was a genius. This way to cut the bread, or cut the dough. Okay, now, I find that using upholstery thread is the best thread because it doesn't snap. Or if you use traditional thread, a lot of times it'll break while you're trying to cut the dough. Okay, now, what I like to do is score the bread. Scoring means you're going to make little marks in it so you know where to cut the bread. We need to get 16 rolls out of this. So most people are pretty good at eyeing up half. Okay, so I'm going to find the halfway mark here and just make a line. Okay, so now I have 2. I'm going to cut each of those in half. And again, I'm not really cutting, I'm scoring. So now I have 4. Right? I'm going to mark each of the halves of those. Now I have 8. And now I'm going to mark the halves of those. And now we have 16. So there's our 16 rolls, and they're all relatively close. Now, before I continue, I need to make sure my pan is ready. And the directions for this are, we will be making these in great big sheet pans. So I've just shrunken this down for the recipe. But here's our sheet. We'll have big sheet pans that have butter and sugar in them. So you put a half cup of melted butter in the bottom, and then you sprinkle, which is 1 stick, and then you sprinkle a half cup of sugar in here. And yes, it looks like an enormous amount of sugar. It is. This will, like I said, these are not low-cal, but they are good. All right? Now, this layer of butter and sugar will caramelize in the oven. So that'll make that nice brown goo, you know, that nice syrup, and it'll also keep your rolls from sticking to the bottom of the pan. Okay? So as I cut, then we'll put them in there. So here's the trick. Okay? Wrap it around your fingers a little bit. You slide it underneath, crisscross, and pull. And there's your cinnamon roll. And I'm just, okay? And it's got the nice spiral pattern that is so familiar with cinnamon rolls. Okay. Slide it under, crisscross right at the line you made, and pull. Okay, and there's your nice, beautiful cinnamon roll. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to put all of these in the pan. And then the next step is we have to let it proof. That takes an hour at room temperature or overnight in the fridge. And what's going to happen is they're all going to rise again. All right, so once these are all done, the next step is proofing. We will either cover them with a towel at room temperature or plastic wrap to go in the fridge overnight.